Right, we are reconvening our afternoon meeting of the House Environment Committee to talk about next steps on bills that we have been taking testimony on. And I would like to start with the one we just left off with, H778, an act relating to dam safety. Taking a fair amount of testimony on this. And I'm curious what members' current thoughts are. I think I'll let Ella start. Yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, thanks. We've heard from a number of parties. We're definitely going to hear from Green Mountain Power later this week, and that's sort of one perspective we haven't heard from as a private dam owner. We might hear from someone from Waterbury. I think that's all the rest of the testimony that we have scheduled, or potentially scheduled. And yeah, my observation is that generally folks, the stakeholders are pretty supportive of the bill. VEM didn't spend a lot of time on this, the director, but he did mention that he'd really like to see us take out that first section that sort of says we will do all the EOPs across the state for high hazard dams that have a PAR over 100. And understandably, he's just asking us to focus on the pilot project. And so what I would like to propose is that we sort of move some of the language somehow into, I don't want to lose that our intention as legislature is that we should have EOPs for all of these regions that could have a really significant impact. But I think if we put some language, and Michael, you'll tell me if I'm wrong, if we could put some language into the report back under the section about the pilot, and perhaps basically a report back on how will VEM over the course of a certain number of years, please describe that. I feel like we can capture that as our intention in that report back and request VEM to talk about in that report back how they'll be able to accomplish that. I feel like we captured the essence of that intention without putting it in that first section. And Mark Molly and I, both had that conversation with VEM even before we started testimony in this, and had already understood that might come from VEM. So you might not have heard it really clearly because we had already talked about it separately, but that was my intention. And just as a reminder, that's 33 dams that are state regulated currently. There's a couple more dams that are going to get moved over from PUC over the next few years into DEC regulation. It'll add, I think, a couple more dams to that list. And then there's I'm not sure how many, but I think it was 7. I think somebody told us it was 7 federally regulated dams that might fall in that category. But actually, sorry, we were also told that we don't exactly know what the PAR is on the federally regulated dams. And that DEC thinks they could get that number, but they just don't have the data already. So one of the other changes I wanted to make in here was to clarify that we do intend for EOPs to be done regardless of who regulates the dam. If it meets that PAR over 100 persons.
Could I just interject?
Yes, please.
So the Flood Control Act, Federal Flood Control Act, says the Corps of Engineers pretty much has exclusive jurisdiction over flood control dams. And so we can't permit them. And I'm not sure what authority we have to dictate who does the planning for flood control dams. I have to look into that.
Right, but it wouldn't be on the dam. We wouldn't be asking anything of the dam owner other than DEC. I mean, what I heard from Ben Green was that he did think he'd be able to get the information about the PAR. But like what I hear you saying is we can't.
No, it's not that. Well, I don't know. That's
yeah.
They've largely just been excluded from state regulation for as long as I've been here. And there's a section that says in statute that says they're not going to be regulated by the state. I don't know who gets to dictate who does the EOP for them. I don't know.
Okay, well, I think Ben Green felt like that was doable, and so I'd love to work with you and him on exploring that.
Okay.
So in real world, the Army Corps doesn't do the emergency planning, but they, like you heard from Drew with Ball Mountain and Townsend Dam, and in my case with the North Springfield Dam, they meet with the fire EMS to let them, so that they're familiar with how they operate and what they're capable of doing, and notification downstream, et cetera.
Good communication, there's good relationships.
Yeah.
Work owned, work regulated might be different story. Anyway, I think my intention would be to work with Ben on that because he seemed to believe the state could work with the feds to get some of that information. And then there's a variety of things that I've heard really should be get incorporated into this report back on the pilot. And that's, I have a long list of things that I'd love to talk with Michael about and try and work into that and have a more robust description of that pilot project and the report back. And that's the changes I've been thinking about.
So do members have more thoughts on this bill, questions, more people they want to hear from? Or Michael, anyone we haven't heard from that you think we should hear from?
So does section 1 come out and just become part of the pilot, or does section 1 remain? And you have them as part of the pilot report back how they're going to achieve that requirement?
My vision was to take it out,
Okay,
but that's because that was the express request from VEM. If we left it in, I think we'd need to make those dates way longer.
Well, or you make, I think, Michael, are you suggesting use that language for the report back on, like, what would it take for VEM to do this is what we need. The information
Right.
is how much money do they need to make that happen?
right. I
Right.
think I wanted to know if you were going to use section 1 as kind of a leverage. That if they didn't report back, but it sounds like you're not, you're going to take it out and you're going to put language in about how they're going to do the EOPs for all of those high hazard.
That's what we've been requested to do, and Mark and I felt comfortable with that. You, as our lawyer, will you advise us on the pros and cons of doing that?
I think VEM will be a lot happier if you take section 1 out.
Yes.
And then they're going to come back and tell us what it would take to do it.
Right.
Right.
Okay, good.
But when you say take it out, you mean just remove it to
Remove.
We'll take out the requirement
the requirement.
and move into some, and then add language
report.
about, in order to,
Characteristics we're looking for
Yes.
in the report.
how would you do this over what time frame?
All right. Representative Austin.
Just having worked on emergency response and as an EMT, I'm very concerned about this kind of notion that we have time, that this time when the rain events are increasing. So we have this element out there that we don't know about, in terms of rain events. And, it's like, oh, we have, 2 years or something to plan it. That's concerning to me. I'm just wondering if it's possible to require, like, all schools in a floodplain to have a plan and to practice it once a year, an evacuation plan. The fact that they don't have, that's concerning for me. And also, just thinking about busing and family how families will relocate. And the other thing is just, I don't understand about the warning siren. I don't know why every town that could be impacted by a flood isn't required to have a warning siren that goes off at least 24 hours ahead of a possible flood or a dam breaking. That would be the minimum. It would be warning siren.
Representative Chapin.
I guess I appreciate your concerns, particularly about sensitive populations in facilities like schools. Maybe there's also like senior living facility. There might be a number of types of facilities we might call out in this report back as making sure planning and the training is inclusive of those entities that aren't actually necessarily run or owned by the municipality. So I think that that could make sense. So I'd be happy to try and work on some language that would include that.
And I'd be glad to help in any way I can.
Representative North.
Yeah, a couple of things I heard from Drew that I thought were very interesting. And again, I am not an EMS person, so maybe all this stuff is already in there implicitly, and I just don't know enough to know that it's included. But the whole list of all the different things that he said should be included in the plan, like make sure you're working with urban search and rescue, interoperability and interagency communications, emergency equipment, and its freshness, which is the term I think he was kind of getting at. But it's, is it still good or not? Infrastructure, evacuations of medically vulnerable, shelter sites and their access, school evacuations, all those kinds of things. He was going through the big list.
Mhm.
And we gotta make, maybe it's in there, maybe it's not, I don't know, but we gotta make sure all those individual things are like, yeah, we want all that in the plan.
Yeah, I basically have that exact same list from Drew's testimony.
Yeah. And then another thing he mentioned is this thing, term, again, and I'm not familiar with, uncontrolled release notice.
Hmm.
And, like, what does that mean? That sounded pretty ominous. And maybe that's a standard terminology, but I just did a quick search on the bill and I don't see that listed anywhere. So is that like one of the many thresholds that need to be included in an emergency operation plan? If you get to the uncontrolled release notice, here's what you do.
Make sure it's in there,
Yeah.
right?
Can I just ask about dam owners? What, are they responsible for making sure their dam is operational? Yes. Okay.
Well, to the uncontrolled release thing, Drew was referring to specifically to federal dams in his testimony just now. But we also have that with state dams. And I guess I don't know if there's, I know that the southern towns have warnings, sirens. I don't know if towns around us that have them. They're probably mostly related to the nuclear power plant, but they also may be related to the larger federal dams. You guys don't with the state dams?
But that whole Texas flooding in Texas, that one town that did have a warning system, people survived.
Mhm.
And the one town that voted against it because they didn't want to spend the money, that's where there were a lot of deaths.
Mhm.
And I just don't understand why we can't just mandate, that there's a warning siren in towns that face a threat of flooding.
Spell out recommendations on warning systems.
But do
We're gonna write
man-
the-
I
we're gonna
would
write
say
the plan.
mandate, but-
That's what's going on.
Well, we can, yeah. All right, other thoughts on substance of it or witnesses? We will be hearing from Green Mountain Power, who has a representative in the room right now, and I don't know if there's others on the agenda. But we'll find out.
Possibly someone from Waterbury if he's able to make it, but
Okay.
I don't think it would be substantially different than what we heard from folks from that point.
Great. All right. Moving on, the beverage redemption bureau. That's no longer with us, but Michael, the numbers changing for the sheets. I think I made a certain request and then they seem to have changed a couple times. I guess I'm curious where are we with them and what do you know about where they came from?
So there was the original request to just have your request to me to move some of them or to make them available. And then Matt proposed language, which you were away and the other members approved that it go into the bill. And that's the numbers that are in the draft right now.
And
But
is the current draft 2.1?
Yes.
Okay.
And then Matt came back
Yeah.
with new language for increased numbers, and not all of the Representative Sackwitz specifically said don't include it. And so I didn't. But that's what Jared put up and said, oh, this is the numbers. That hasn't been approved yet.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies that. Then I get it. All right, members have thoughts on the redemption PRO and or the amount of these sheets?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'd still would love to hear more about what they're actually spending the money on, more specifically
Yeah.
than what we've heard so far. And what their estimated costs are. We've heard the kinds of things that they're expecting. We've sort of heard very broad strokes of what their needs are, but they're coming up. Not told us they have this very specific range, which isn't really that big. And so it sounds like they must have some sort of pretty well worked out list of projects that they're expecting. And I think it'd be great to know more about.
Yeah.
A couple of comments. One is Paul Burns. I don't necessarily agree with a lot of what he usually says, but I liked what he said today, actually. I thought we got to spend around times when we can find agreement. All of the concepts around fair compensation for redemption centers, that maybe there should be some kind of a floor or appeal process or something to make sure that they are being fairly compensated. And again, I just go back to this conversation I had very recently with the guy in my district who owns several redemption centers, and he's just terrified of being pushed out by the PRO. The business is going to come in and just eliminate it. They'll undercut him for a full year. He won't survive, and then they'll just raise the prices back up. You know, if they get into a negotiation point of view, or some bigger company can just get rid of the little guy. He absolutely recognizes the need for efficiency improvement. So if we could work in some, again, Paul Burns was mentioning it, that it's a capitalistic society, and you got to encourage investment somehow, but without continuing to pay them the higher levels once the efficiencies are achieved. So if there's a way to encourage some investment, like with tax breaks or something for the redemption centers, or matching or something with some of these sheets, I'd almost rather do it with some kind of a matching incentive than just, all right, everybody gets, you know, the 1.5 million or whatever the number's in there, and just divide it up and go figure out how to spend it. I don't know.
Okay, so that's two thoughts. One is
It is.
just on the handling fee. Let's just have a little discussion about the handling fee that was brought up, because yeah, I share the concerns. And so I wonder about other members' thoughts, the handling fee concept. Right now it's fixed in statute, and it has been. And could be we keep it fixed, and then I don't know if there's a way of, I don't know, is there a way of staggering after, or we need some creative thinking right here. Yeah.
I agree.
Michael, do you have thoughts on that part of Paul's testimony?
Well, number one, you can be very clear that as part of the collection system, redemption centers have to be offered the opportunity to be part of the system. Right? So they can't just be excluded if the PRO doesn't believe it's efficient
So
or worthwhile.
existing redemption centers must be included.
Right, just like the retailers and the solid waste management districts, the bill says they have to have opportunity to opt in.
And does it say that now?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
But it doesn't, it says retailers, municipalities, solid waste management districts. You could add redemption centers to that.
Oh, yeah. Okay, let's do that.
As to the handling fee, you could build a floor into whatever the cost for the program for, you know, they get paid no less than X. And you could build that off of what the handling fee is now. So that they couldn't, as Rep. Norris said, undercut them for a period of time, drive them out of business, and then fill that with their own collection.
So, but you're saying keep the handling fee where it is now.
It doesn't necessarily need to be a handling fee. You could say as part of the plan that their fair reimbursement or their fair compensation to a retailer or redemption center shall be no less than a certain amount. And it could be per container, or it could be, you know, what an average of what the redemption center collected over the past 3 years. Something, you know, some way to set a floor on what the compensation for redemption will be.
And then Representative Sacco.
I like the idea of a floor. I mean, we have a system which is operating at a certain level right now with a certain amount of profitability. Apparently not quite enough, but it's keeping some of these places alive at the moment. If we do have greater efficiencies, it might be nice to be able to see that number potentially go down in the future to make the whole system cost less if people can still, you know, make money on it. So I don't think we necessarily want a floor for forever. And also, whenever we put a number like this in statute, inflation happens, the world changes, and our statute stays the same.
Which is part of why it's not profitable now.
Right. And so I do, but at least as an interim measure, I think a floor makes some sense. I like the idea of the PRO being a nonprofit, so they don't have that extra sort of incentive to undercut existing distributors and redemption centers. And then I also wonder, I thought the idea of a sunset also sounded like it had some potential. And so, you know, we could have we heard about the idea of having a sunset to make sure that the negotiations that were being considered, that if they weren't successful in the way we envision, that we'd be able to come back to it. But I wonder if we include a floor, whether we could have a sunset that would then go back and look at whether that floor is still the right number.
One concern I'm thinking about is for the floor, would that not just be then the default handling fee? Why would it ever be higher than that?
Proposed answer to that is that like that where we have redemption deserts right now, it's just not profitable to be in that area, and we've set requirements. You got to have at least 3 per county. So like Northeast Kingdom, there are big areas where it costs more to put one in there, so they'd have to maybe provide 4.5 or 5.5 or 6.5 cents or whatever, you know, to encourage somebody to open a redemption center or be willing to do it. That, and in fact, that was the answer I got when I said, well, why don't we just skip the whole PRO and just increase the handling fee to 4.5 cents, and wouldn't that make it profitable? And you have more redemption centers coming in. And then the response to me on that when I asked that last week was that well, it might cost 4.5 or 5.5 cents in your area, but Northeast Kingdom, it might cost 6.5 cents. Whereas in Chittenden County, where it's easy, it might only cost 2.5 cents. So maybe it would be better to be negotiable by geography. PRO could do that. Okay, so that was the response to why we need a PRO rather than just increase the handling fee. I don't know if I buy that or not, but that was the response.
My other thought was about if there's a role for when we talk about negotiations between the PRO and the redemption centers, if there's a role for, if those negotiations are too difficult for something to go to some sort of arbitration, which could happen relatively quickly, to not hold up the process of the PRO. So it wouldn't have to come back to like the agency to decide, which might be a time-consuming process, but some sort of a third, you know, unbiased third party that could help the two parties come together.
All right, other thoughts on the handling fee? Michael, you look like you're clear as mud on this.
I'm just,
I think we're gonna try on the floor at the level that we're at now.
okay. Okay,
I'm inclined to make it too complicated.
Yeah, those are just.
Let's just try on
those are my
that.
thoughts.
And then the next item was, you started into it, Representative North.
Ways to incentivize investment or to enable investment, so
Or-
improve efficiencies.
How to use these sheets and whether or not we should have a one-to-one. Matt.
Right, yeah, whether it should be a one-to-one match or rather than just giving the money to spend, do some kind of a match, or I don't know, I'm just trying to think of ways to.
Yeah, so it won't be just giving them money. That's what I was trying to get clarity from Matt on, like, they're gonna have a grant requirement. And they'll have to, that would be written up before they spent the money. And we haven't gotten a lot of information on the budgeting. Or what other money they'd have to spend.
you could provide more detail into what the grant program is going to be. Right now, it's consistent with how the solid waste management assistance account is set up. There's not a lot of detail in that account on how they get to spend the money, but you could provide more detail for this grant program. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with Matt's language. It's just that that account has never really been like the most detailed grant program. You could be more detailed.
Yeah, maybe we should put some boundaries on it. Okay, we will think about that. Feeling like we're low oxygen in the room right now. In fact, I can see that we are low oxygen in the room right now.
Two other ideas that.
Okay.
Again, based on Paul Burns' testimony that I liked, building on Larry's thought of the nonprofit entity, Paul also mentioned the requirement for a diverse stakeholder board. I want to make sure that PRO board has people who are redemption center operators on it.
Mhm. Okay, did you catch those, Michael?
I heard the board for the PRO needs to have redemption center. Or
Yeah.
not just for it should be people that are part of the collection system.
Yes, yes,
Right. Just make sure everybody's ready
And
to.
nonprofit.
and nonprofit.
And make that it needs to be a nonprofit. That I heard when I went to some of those conferences over the summer, that a PRO needs to be a nonprofit.
Yep.
So I totally agree with that. Last thing for me then is, Paul suggested a list of required characteristics, or, like metrics that redemption centers, collection centers would need to report on, like their percentage of uptime, how they need to be open for a certain number of hours. The speed with which a person can get rid of their bottles. Or it can't be like a reverse vending machine where it takes a minute to take a bottle. I wonder, can't you just stand there for half an hour to put your stuff in? The amount of lighting, the safety of their, those kinds of things. I thought that was a reasonable.
Basic standards and then also.
Standards.
Yeah, okay.
Standards for redemption. So. That's it.
Great. Did Paul send his testimony yet? Paul Burns? All right, other thoughts on this? PRO? No. I would like to do one more topic, which is the budget. Clean Water Fund folks came in also last week. Sounds like that Representative North would like more detail from them on the Clean Water Fund. Separate from the budget, but
I just don't know where that money gets spent.
there's probably more in their links that they gave you. I would follow those first because they probably have access to it, but yeah. And then on the budget, I'm sort of getting the sense that it was, any questions? We're gonna hear from Jared this week, next Thursday on it. We're not getting a lot of, are folks hearing from people on the budget? Or do you have burning questions that you need answered on the budget?
I'm just a little concerned about the Clean Water Fund and losing money. I know Jared said it was, wouldn't have a huge impact, but I just want to say I like the idea of a sunset on that. So I don't know if that's budget related, but
on the sheets, moving to the, yeah, it's definitely a short-term
Yeah,
time bound.
I am concerned. Last night I was on the Champlain Advisory Committee, like 2 hours, just listening to them, and the people that are carrying out a lot of the projects to implement clean water initiatives are dealing with, it would be EPA was on also, representatives from the EPA, and they were saying the administration that the EPA is requiring, they keep changing it, you know, in terms of when people can get their money, when they can't, and forms they have to fill out, and that costs them money.
Mhm.
So they were trying to just, you know, relate that. It isn't that they're not being responsible, but the administrative costs, you know, are changing and not in order of how they do projects, how they pay out contractors or bill. So that was just interesting to me.
Okay.
Just, yeah, because it sounded like they were doing very good work.
All right. Final thought is, tomorrow we're gonna walk through the latest edition of H 632 with Michael, hopefully moving towards passing that bill out. So please read it and, think about other additions. Michael?
For the next draft of that, the walkthrough tomorrow, do you want that municipal tire hauler language that Matt had in H204?
Yes, a paragraph would be
Yep.
good. And,
And then he was
I-
gonna come back with more language about,
about his report back to us.
yeah.
Yes. Great.
Fish and Wildlife are coming in this week.
Mm.
as well, and are we gonna try to find like a compromise or a better solution for the purple paint?
I'm not sure that's what they're coming in on this week.
That's what I was wondering. It said miscellaneous something.
What I want to do right now is give folks time. I think the producer thing hasn't actually started, so we may miss it. But a lot of great Vermont businesses will be here at 4:30. So I want to make sure people have time to go to that and anything else they need to do this afternoon. We can, any other thoughts on 632 before we move on to other topics? No, okay. So the posting conversation. So what we need to do is kind of move some bills out of committee before we start taking
Okay.
up new things. So I want to have closure on the things that we just talked about, including the budget letter. Okay.
I just think we need the commissioner back in.
Yes, well, if we take it up, yes, for sure. All right, with that,